Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and today I'm going to be reviewing Banish the Snakes. This is a game published by G&T. It's designed by Kevin McPartland and Jerry Shiles, and it is a cooperative game about converting people to Christianity in Ireland during the age of the Great Irish Saints, specifically St. Patrick. Alright, so here is Banish the Snakes all set up, and I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of the game. Essentially, this is a cooperative game where you can have up to 6 players, but because it's cooperative, you can also solo it. So I've been playing it solo with 2 saints. For this particular setup, I went with Palladius and Patrick because they're the original first 2, big Irish saints who are there doing missionary work. And so it felt historically appropriate to have them. So the goal of this particular game is to try to convert all of the people of Ireland to Christianity. So you have this map over here where you've got all the people, so the little green blocks are the people. I stickered these myself, by the way, so be ready to invest some time if you get this. And then at the starting setup, in every area, you have leaders. So you've got chiefs, you've got kings, and then you have a high king, all of whom have some hierarchical abilities to press down on the people below them and help you convert them. And you've also got druids, who you need to eliminate from areas in order to build churches there. And so at various points in the game, you're going to maybe try to convert a druid. You can flip them. Ooh, that's a -5. So that's a pretty big modifier. So you don't always know just how tough the druids really are until you get there. But once you've got a druid out of the way, then you can build a church. It's also possible to die in this game. And when you do that, you can leave behind like a grave site that becomes like a little pilgrimage site. And sometimes you can flip that to become a relic as well. So even in your death, you may be contributing to the continued spread of Christianity. So while you're over here on the map, basically some of your primary actions are going to be just moving around, doing what's called prepare, but essentially you are mentally beating people down to make them ready to receive the message of Jesus, and then you can roll to try to convert them. You can build churches, you can improve churches, and you can switch cards around. Is basically, the main actions of the game. You're going to be coming around here and just talking to people until they give up and accept Christ. The other thing that's going on throughout the course of the game is that you've got these event cards that come up. I actually really like the event system because you don't fully know what event is going to show up on the card. So this is a card that gets shuffled into one of the decks after you do your first round, but this little arrow is like the key. So whenever you draw an event, I admit I put this up at the top because my grandfather is convinced that we're descended from Neil of the 9 hostages, so I'm happy when he shows up in games. But blue points to blue. So you actually can have different color coding on some of the cards that will point to different things depending on what is here on the key card. So that's actually a pretty neat event system. The other thing you have here is like a paganism tracker. So apparently paganism is taking over across the water. So Scotland and England and all of that can eventually end up pagan. You move these counters over when that happens and you shuffle new event cards into your event deck. And then the game ends if paganism takes over in Britain. I have some thoughts about that, which we'll get to in the final thoughts. But, the spread of paganism can actually end the game for you. So basically there are 4 ways to end the game. One is for the game to end because of the spread of paganism. But you can also do it through conversion. So the instant that all of the people, not their leaders, but the people of Ireland are converted to Christianity, at that point you can have a full victory. When the draw deck runs out of cards, so if you just take forever and that happens, then that will stop the game and you have to basically count points. Or you can have an Acolyte's Zeal track run out. So basically what can happen is your saint can die, and if you don't have a replacement saint from the event deck to come and actually take over, then they're replaced by an Acolyte, and the Acolyte can die. So if you're kind of on your second life and you haven't got another saint to take on the work and your Acolyte dies, then it can cause the ending to the game. You'll note on this player board, you've got Zeal, which is essentially how much life you have. You can make a final effort as you're about to leave this world, and hopefully go where you think you're going, and then you'll die, and then you get an Acolyte, and also there's a little grave that can turn into a relic for you. You've got action points that determine how many actions you can take on the turn, and then you also have this convert attempt slider. this is basically where you calculate the efforts of your evangelism versus the resistance of the people that you're trying to convert. And you take into account their leaders as well as their own personal inclinations. So like this -6 person is like super not into Christianity, but you're going to have to work on it anyway. One thing that's kind of interesting is that the leaders, when you flip a person, they just go to a clover on the back. When you flip a leader, they have like another side. So like this dude is like a -3 modifier in favor of paganism. If you flip him, he's a +2 in favor of Christianity. So, you might have somebody who's a super devoted pagan, but then is kind of a lukewarm Christian and vice versa. And you don't fully know. You're supposed to put these out randomly at the beginning of the game, so you don't see. I mean, you do kind of see as you put them out, and there have been some complaints about that on BGG, but I kind of feel like, just don't look that hard. It'll be fine. The other thing to note is that if you're trying to mess with druids and you mess up, they can put out dolmens, so like their little monumental areas can gain power based on your failure. So that is essentially an overview of Banish the Snakes. You handle events, you go around, you evangelize people, and then you attempt to convert them. You try to remove druids so you can put churches in. And when you die, you try to make the most out of that by putting a grave or maybe a relic for yourself out in the area where you met the Lord. So now that we've had our overview, let's go ahead and have some final thoughts. All right, so now for some final thoughts. So Banish the Snakes. All right, so I had a review out a little while ago of In Magnificent Style where I said that it was a really, really good game, but that I found the theme distasteful. With Banish the Snakes, I think what we're looking at is an okay game with a theme that I find quite distasteful for actually a number of reasons. Partially because I just don't really dig conversion attempts, and then partially because I actually think that historically this game is not a great take on the period, and that makes me sad because I would like to see a good take on the period. So let's go ahead and talk about the game first, and then let's get in talking about the theming. Because I think that some people don't really care about the theme, they just want to play the game. So is the game itself a great game? Honestly, it's fine. It's like a very garden variety cooperative game. I feel that it's a bit repetitive, both because the actions are fairly limited and because the pattern that you're going to do things in. So typically you're going to mess with leaders and druids and then try to convert people because you want to get your modifiers up. That's the kind of thing that encourages you to try to play in the same patterns. And so as a game, I got kind of tired of this by the third play. I played it a couple more times and decided that I was done. That is a little bit disappointing because, first of all, I would love to see a really good game that's themed on the history of Christianity. And that needs both gameplay and good treatment of the subject. And I think gameplay-wise, this really feels like it was made a long time ago, if that makes sense. I feel like I would have been more open to this cooperative game maybe 5 years ago, or even longer than I'm now, because there's so much innovation on the design front that this one kind of feels stale already. And I wanted something that felt fresh and exciting and where my actions didn't kind of fall into the same repetitive patterns. I do like the event cards and how they work. I think that having the key card and then the event is really cool. I enjoyed some of the Gift of the Spirit cards that come into the game. So occasionally you'll get a Gift of the Spirit where you can do something really special. So this one lets you move your saints around. And so the game has kind of echoes of things that I think could be really interesting. But ultimately, I just don't think it fully plays out that way. I think that the game just doesn't have enough different things going on to give it a fully rich cooperative experience. The other thing is that, because it's you against the game, I think that could have been done in a more kind of delicious way, honestly. But actually, it really just feels like you do something and the game undoes it. You do it, the game undoes it. You do something, the game undid it again. And so that doesn't bother me in the sense that I totally understand the game has to push against you, but it doesn't feel very compelling. I feel like, in a way, you're trying to convert a bunch of people in a fairly static environment. And I always see religious environments as very vibrant, diverse, full of argument, full of spirit, of all kinds. And so, I would have liked to see something that was more evocative of that feeling. What we've really got here is essentially a cooperative war game where instead of having weapons, you have got a battle for hearts and minds going on the board. And mechanically, however, you could really just swap this out and like maybe make it something else. The conversion attempts are really very much like rolling to attack. And I guess I kind of find that disappointing. I don't really like seeing those things look mechanically the same, because to me they shouldn't be. And so as a game, like, it's okay. It's not bad. I would play it on a game night, but I would not pull this out or like be anxious to play it again, because it's just fine. It's fine in the way that a lot of cooperative games are fine, just not enough spice. So now I want to talk about the historical treatment. So I think that every time you play a game, you're bringing a bit of yourself to it, right? So there are people who I think will like this game because of the theming and because of their perspective on the subject matter. And like, that's fine. That's your business. But this is my review. So we're going to get the Davidson perspective here. So on the one hand, I was really excited to see a game about Christianity in Ireland just because I think they should exist. My own family, I mentioned my grandfather's really into genealogy. He, based on some DNA tests he did, is convinced that we are all descended from Neil the Nine Hostages. I really like seeing some spicy Irish history out there. I think Irish literature is really cool. Like, obviously, for personal reasons, I find that interesting. However, also for personal reasons, I really don't like the theme of this game. So I will just be real. So I say I'm secular a lot in my videos. What that really means is that I'm technically agnostic. But I usually will tell people that I am an atheist straight up. And the reason I tell them that is because I don't want people to try to convert me. I find it uncomfortable and rude. I don't enjoy it at all. It's not a fun process for people to attempt with me. I think from either direction, probably. And so a game that's entirely about basically bullying people until they accept Christ doesn't feel great to me. Partially because, as somebody who has been on the receiving end of that kind of treatment, I really don't like it. Partially because, as somebody who is a religious historian, I actually know a lot of practicing pagans, including someone who considers himself to be a practicing druid. And when I mentioned that I was reviewing this game, the level of offense they took was very, very high. So, I had friends talk about how this really hurts representation, that there are still pagans out there. Treating them like some sort of garden variety enemy to a race is offensive to people who are still attempting to be in touch with older religious practices. And then also, one of my friends who is very in touch with her own Irish heritage was very offended. So I will say Banish the Snakes is based on how the Irish saved civilization, or at least the designer's interpretation of it. And that is a book that I do have some problems with that we'll get to. But the idea is that the Irish preserve civilization by copying Latin and Greek texts and preserving literacy. But what that narrative erases is that what we're losing is a lot of information about druidry, about earlier religious practices. We lose a lot of folklore and culture. So when you want to convert people to a new religion, very often you're also changing culture. And that means that you're losing aspects of culture, even if you also feel like you're preserving something that you think is worth the preservation. And so people who want to be in touch with older Irish religious expressions are not going to respond really well to this game, because you might think you're preserving civilization, but you're also performing the act of taking something away from them that they wish they still had. And so it was really interesting to get some modern pagan perspectives in this game. That seems like a very minority position. I suppose it is, but they're there and they matter. And I know some very intelligent people who are practicing pagans. So I, from the secular end, just kind of find the theme gross because I don't like to be on the receiving end of conversion attempts. But for some people, this has a much deeper meaning. It's much more offensive on like a personal and spiritual level. But that kind of leads me into the next thing I want to talk about as a historian of early Christianity. So when we talk about preserving culture and presenting culture, I actually think that this is a perfect example of why I'm so obsessed with board games as history and taking them seriously as history. So it is true that I'm not a big fan of conversion attempts like on a personal level, but actually I think what bothered me more about this game is that I have a higher opinion of Christianity and its spread than this game has. And in a way that's actually really sad. I also, I mentioned that I'm a secular person, but that doesn't mean that I don't really appreciate Christian history. I went and got a PhD in ancient Christianity. I've taught New Testament throughout my adult teaching life. I taught it last summer. I may teach it again this summer. And so, this is about the spread of a religion that I find really interesting. And it's honestly a topic that I really, really love. And so I would like to see really good treatments of Christianity in board games. And this also doesn't do it for me on that level. So the reason it doesn't, well, there are a few reasons. One is that I think the source material it's based on is flawed. So How the Irish Saved Civilization is a book that is from the 90s, It is a compelling read. It's like a fun tour of early literature, and then also some mention of preservation of texts in Ireland. But I think the book itself has issues, which I don't want to get into here. But I also think that this game's interpretation of the book is flawed as well. And so, like, we have kind of layers of historical interpretation that I think are not great. So just the quick version. I think that How the Irish Saved Civilization very much overstates its case. And I also think that the treatment of Christianity in the Roman Empire and in Europe is very much a bad treatment that exists to kind of elevate what the author wants to say about Ireland. So the way that he talks about Augustine and Ausonius, some like kind of contemporary Christians from other parts of the Roman Empire, some of it he's right about, but some of his takes just kind of suck. And I will just say that, I would have to like go through the book line by line, and that's not what we're here for. But he's got a number of bad takes throughout the book, in my opinion, as a professionally trained religious historian. But the other thing is that this game itself, I think, misses a lot of what is really cool about Christianity from this period, and like that's what makes me sad. So in Banish the Snakes, the idea is that you have to convert the people of Ireland so that literacy in Ireland will happen, the text will be preserved, and the Irish will save civilization. And this is just based on so many kind of faulty assumptions, especially within the game mechanisms themselves, that I just can't go with this as a historical representation at all. Like, at all. So I want to talk about a couple of things. Like, we could probably talk about more, but this is going to go forever. So first of all is the way that conversion is treated in this game actually, I think, misses a lot of things that could be really cool. So the structure of Ireland, according to this game, and I think that there's some truth to it, I'm not saying they're totally wrong, is that it's very hierarchical. So you have a high king, you have some kings, you have some chieftains, and you have some people, and you also have druids acting as kind of authorities in society. But for the designers of this game, that's such an ingrained hierarchy that there's literally like a card about it that's like a reference, and they have it on the back of the rulebook. So the idea is that if you want to convert people, you have to influence here, but then also going down the chain, because people's higher-ups will influence how they believe. And there's certainly something to that, but I also think that treating this as a traditional war game and going with this hierarchical structure, I think misses a lot of what St. Patrick was doing that was really cool. I mean, we have a couple of examples of his writing, and they're really, really lovely, but they're not lovely because he's talking about bullying the High King. They're lovely because he's talking about supporting women, slaves, basically the people that Jesus seems to have come for in the New Testament. Patrick himself expressed a lot of concern for women, and especially for women who were in slavery. And I actually find that really meaningful, partially because this game is about going with social mores and using social structure to promote Christianity. But actually, Christianity, I feel, at its best, maybe sometimes at its worst too, is a countercultural movement, always. And so in Ireland, sexual practice and marriage practice were not compatible with some of the ideas about monastic life, about ascetic life, about virginal life that Patrick was bringing, especially to some of these women who maybe became widowed and decided not to get married again, and did that because they wanted to be chaste for the Lord, but also there are some really good social reasons why they would choose that. Patrick wanted to fight against abuses of women in slavery for really obvious reasons, but also there were women from prominent families who were choosing a life of chastity in order to fully serve the Lord, which is going to please somebody like Patrick. It's not going to please their family. So some of the things that Christians recommend, throughout the history of the religion, are very countercultural, and they also appeal to people in the lower strata of society. I really feel like, in a way, what makes the New Testament special, what makes Jesus special, is that he doesn't show up to talk to the High King or the equivalent, right? He's not there for Herod. He's there for the tax collectors and the farmers, and for, people who are lowly fishermen, for women who are washing his feet with their hair, and that's the best thing they have to offer. Jesus is a tax collectors and prostitutes kind of guy, and that is what makes him special. That's also something that made Patrick special. Patrick, suffered within the Christian hierarchy of his time because he missed out on years of education because he spent those years in Ireland as a slave. And it really saddens me that this game doesn't bring that aspect of the flavor out. That this is very much a masculine game about men trying to convert men and then exert pressure on men who are below them on the hierarchical level, when actually Christianity has always been a little bit more bottom up than it is top to bottom. And that's actually true as far back as Paul. So if you go back and read the letters of Paul very carefully, like go pay attention to the names, you'll be amazed at like how many women he references who are helping him, probably bankrolling him. He needs people who are not obvious leaders in society to make Christianity work, and Patrick needed to do the same thing. And so, yes, there is an Irish hierarchy there. The game isn't 100% wrong, but I think the game really misses out on some richness that's there that really makes me sad. I would love to see a game about the spread of Christianity where what you're really doing is you are getting people in low strata of society to change and help bring change into their households, into the people who are above them who have no reason to want to change. But they get there anyway because their wife has something to say about it. Their slaves have something to say about it. Maybe their young children who are being raised in the household eventually have something to say about it. Fun fact, there's a lot of these kind of narratives in a lot of early Acts of the Apostles, like think like ancient fan fiction. So we have Marvel, ancient people had like monks and saints. And so they, like one of my favorite weird scenes is from the apocryphal like Acts of Andrew. And basically Andrew is at a house while the husband is out preaching to the guy's wife and to the household. The husband comes home early and Andrew's like, crap, I have to run. Like, this guy's gonna kill me. I'm in his house with his wife. But the Lord makes him have to go to the bathroom for a very long time, and that gives the Christians time to escape, which I think is hilarious. Like, to me, that's the true spirit of Christianity, is that the spirit works in very mysterious ways. But I just really think that Banish the Snakes could have been such an interesting meditation on what happened to Patrick, the influences on his life that made him want to go back to Ireland and help its people. It's just kind of depressing. The other thing is that we know that in Patrick's life, he didn't necessarily have to convert everybody. The game kind of makes that a requirement, but what actually is going on is that Patrick, there's records throughout his whole life, from what I could tell from the books that I read, that he was paying money to leaders in Ireland for permission to build churches and practice Christianity on that land. So in order to build a church, you don't have to get rid of a druid. You just have to bribe somebody. And I actually think that would have been more fun mechanically in the game, is like deciding who to bribe in order to build that land and like, you know, preach to those people. So there's that. The other thing I want to talk about historically about this game, and then I'll stop because we could keep going, but I don't want to, is that the way that this game kind of prefaces the spread of paganism is wrong. And I think that actually kind of goes back to some of its source material issues. So one of my huge issues with how the Irish saved civilization is that the way the author talks about Europe, not Ireland, but like Europe, post the fall of the Roman Empire, is the idea that the Roman Empire falls and like it creates a huge problem. Honestly, most likely things just kind of continue as they did for hundreds of years. It's no longer considered in vogue in historical circles to talk about the fall of the Roman Empire as if it's like a dramatic event. Rome was kind of already a backwater by this time when Odoacer deposes Romulus Augustulus, who's the last Western emperor of Rome. Basically, the barbarians kept a lot of the same administrative system and just like used what the Romans had built. This idea of these crazy barbarians who are destructive and uncivilized is unfair, both in terms of who was actually making up the Roman army and a lot of Roman citizenship at this time, and also the behavior of the alleged barbarians who really were not as depicted. So that echoes of that show up in this game. But the other thing it shows in this game that I think is very weird is the idea that paganism is spreading in Britain, and that's something that you have to race against the clock on, that the idea of going into the Dark Ages means that paganism is spreading. That connection is just not right. I mean, the reality of the situation is that once Christianity becomes ascendant in the Roman Empire, it gets so ascendant that, like, paganism's not coming back. The last pagan emperor of Rome lived and died long before the setting of this game. So, moment of silence for my man Julian the Apostate. But the idea that Britain is becoming more pagan is frankly ridiculous. So Patrick was born into a Christian family. He just didn't really get serious about his faith until later. He was kind of like blah about it, but he was never really like a pagan. Coroticus, the king that he writes to the bishops of England about, because the guy is basically doing slave raids. So it's interesting, the playbook, the history kind of wants to downplay this aspect of it, but that dude also identifies as a Christian, which is why Patrick is asking that he be excommunicated and not saying that he's a dirty pagan who needs to convert and get it right. So Patrick is a Christian. He's operating in a Christian world. Ireland is interesting to him because it's a great unconverted frontier. not because paganism is rising everywhere. He wants to convert Ireland because Britain already has a fairly established church. There's a system of bishops for him to work with there already. And I'm not saying that everybody in Britain was a Christian, because frankly, not everybody in Ireland ever became Christian. The idea of converting everybody as a game thing is kind of weird. But the idea that paganism is taking over is just historically bizarre to me. And also in the game, some of the ways that that's expressed are truly very strange. So for example, here's a card I pulled. We have the Pelagian heresy. So Pelagius was a monk. Also interesting is the playbook is like, well, he's not associated with any monastic order. So actually monks in this period didn't have to be. You could become an anchorite. You could just go into the desert and do it by yourself. Monks of Syria were like living in trees and on pillars. Like monasticism doesn't look the way you think it does in earlier periods. It's actually super cool. I wrote my dissertation about it. If y'all want to talk about monks at some point, like, oh God, yes, please. But Pelagius was an ascetic for sure. And basically his heresy is that instead of believing in original sin, he says that we have full free will in our choices. And so all of our sins that we commit in life are our choice. So if you look at, for example, Paul, the Apostle Paul really thinks that we can't do it on our own. And that's why we have to have faith over works. Augustine talks about even babies being jealous, nursing at their mother's breast, right? That like there's an inherent evil to humanity that he feels he sees even in earliest childhood. But Pelagius is like, yo, it's all your fault. It's your fault. And like, that's his heresy. So, I mean, I could see complaining that Pelagius is wrong about his take on Christianity. But the fact is that no heretic ever thinks that they're wrong. Heretics think that they're orthodox and that you're the heretic. I mean, that's like the point. But I just want you to look closely. This is advanced paganism by one. Like, why would paganism advance in response to a Christian heresy? What? And like every time there's a raid, like including the sort of Caroticus, like Christian king doing slave raids, it's like, oh, advanced paganism in response to this raid. And that makes zero sense historically. That has no historical grounding in anything. That paganism would advance because Christians are doing stuff? Like, what? And so I just really feel like this game had the opportunity to be something that was really, really rich. Both in terms of its gameplay, which is fairly milquetoast, and in terms of its history, which is wrong, and like wrong in deeply uninteresting ways. So I could go on more about this, but I'm really not going to, because I feel like you're probably tired already, if you're even still here. If you are, thank you so much. But I do want to close off with, this is the reason why talking about games as history is so important to me. I've seen a lot of comments about this game, like, oh, I love playing and I learned so much about Irish history while I was playing. You probably did learn something. The game is not 100% incorrect, but I think that its entire take on Christianity, on conversion to Christianity, on Christianity and society, the interactions between Christianity and paganism, all of those are just so off that I really can't consider this game to be a legitimate historical game that I would recommend for any kind of serious learning. If anything, I would say this game is maybe more of a devotional game that represents a Christian's idea about conversion. But I would not count this game as anything that was seriously an accurate take on the ancient world. And so, even though it's just a game, I also think that we have to talk seriously about those things, especially in a world where Christian nationalism is on the rise in the United States, a world where we are arguing about the role of religion in schools, even though our government will make no establishment of a religion. Games like this, I think, are in bad taste in our current climate. But I also think that they're bad takes on history and that they missed opportunities to bring out the best possible things about Christianity and instead kind of presented it as its worst. So that's how I feel about Banishing the Snakes. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and most of all, happy gaming.